Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my channel, Fluent Pro Hub.
Hey everyone, welcome to Fluent Pro Hub. I'm your host, and with me, as always, is your and my favorite co-host, Emily.
Hey guys, today we're talking about something super important, how to start learning English the right way.
Okay, so today we're going deep on something a lot of people struggle with, learning English as a beginner.
Yeah, it can feel like a pretty daunting task, especially at first,
For sure. I mean, if you're just starting out, it's easy to get overwhelmed. Like, where do you even begin with all the grammar rules and the massive vocabulary?
Right, and there's so much advice out there, it's hard to tell what actually works. What's going to give you a solid foundation.
Exactly. That's what we're going to try to unpack in this deep dive, how to learn English effectively and enjoyably. And we've gone through some really helpful material that emphasizes a really step-by-step approach.
Yeah. One of the key takeaways that kind of jumped out at me is this idea of building a solid base first. Like, you wouldn't try to build a house by starting with the roof, would you?
Definitely not. So how does that translate to language learning?
Well, the material stresses that it's super important to resist the urge to jump into complex grammar or try to memorize tons of advanced vocabulary right away.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to start with the basics, right?
Exactly. It's like building blocks. You've got to lay the foundation first, and that means focusing on common everyday words and simple sentence structures.
Right, things like, hello, how are you? Nice to meet you. What's your name? Where are you from? Those basic phrases you'd use in any conversation.
Yeah, and the sources really highlight how learning those practical daily use words is so much more effective than trying to cram in a bunch of obscure words you might never actually use.
It's about making the learning relevant and meaningful right away, so you can actually see how you can use it.
Exactly. And when you see how you can use it, you're much more likely to remember it. If you're constantly encountering those basic phrases in real life, it reinforces your understanding.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So once you've got a grasp of those foundational phrases, what's next? What do the materials say about that?
Well, one thing that all the sources really stressed is the importance of listening, even before you feel ready to speak yourself.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. Why is listening so crucial?
Well, think about how we all learned our first language. It was all about listening, right? As babies, we spend months and months just absorbing the sounds around us before we even attempt to speak. And material argues that our brains are wired to learn languages through sound. So even if you don't understand everything you're hearing at first, that passive listening is still incredibly valuable.
Okay, I can see that. So how do we put that into practice?
Well, the sources recommend incorporating daily English listening into your routine. Things like watching movies, listening to podcasts, even listening to music can be really beneficial.
So like if I wanted to start with movies, what's the best way to go about it?
The material actually lays out a really helpful step-by-step approach. You can start by watching with subtitles in your native language.
Okay, so that way you're getting the story in the context.
Exactly. Then you can switch to English subtitles, so you're starting to connect the spoken words with their written form.
Ah, I see. And then eventually you can try watching without any subtitles at all.
Yeah, and that's when you really have to rely on your understanding of the context and your developing listening skills.
It sounds challenging but rewarding too.
Yeah, and the sources emphasize that even if you don't catch every word, your brain is still working hard processing the sounds, the rhythms, the intonation of the language.
Right, it's like a workout for your ears.
Exactly. And the same goes for podcasts. They recommend listening to short episodes daily, maybe like 10 minutes or so, and choose topics that you're genuinely interested in, whether it's sports, business, travel, whatever you enjoy.
That's a good tip, because if you're interested in the topic, you're more likely to stick with it, right?
Exactly. And over time, you'll start to pick up more and more. You'll start recognizing words and phrases and getting a feel for the natural flow of the language.
It's that idea of consistency again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Little by little, it all adds up.
Precisely.
Right.
Now let's talk about speaking, because that's often where beginners get really nervous.
Absolutely. I mean, the fear of making mistakes or sounding awkward can be a huge barrier.
The material acknowledges that. It's completely natural to feel that way, but it also stresses that you'll probably never feel completely ready to speak perfectly.
So you just have to dive in, right?
Exactly. The best way to become more comfortable speaking is to simply start doing it, even if it's just a few words at first.
So what are some good ways to start practicing speaking?
Well, one suggestion they have is talking to yourself in English. It might sound a bit strong, but it's a great way to get used to forming sentences and hearing yourself speak the language.
I can see that. So I could be like, I'm making breakfast or I'm going to the store, just simple things like that.
Exactly. And another technique they recommend is called shadowing, which basically means repeating short dialogues from movies or podcasts right after you hear them.
Oh, that's interesting. How does that help?
It helps you work on your pronunciation, and it also helps you internalize the rhythm and intonation of native speakers. You know how they naturally stress certain words and phrases?
I see. It's like learning the music of the language.
Exactly. And another great way to practice speaking is to find opportunities to chat with English-speaking friends or family members.
Even if it's just a few minutes here and there.
Yeah, asking simple questions like, how was your day? Or what are your plans for the weekend can be really helpful.
And if you don't have any English speakers in your immediate circle, you can always try language exchange apps or online communities.
Yeah, there are tons of resources out there where you can connect with other learners and practice your speaking skills.
Awesome. So we've talked about listening and speaking. What about thinking in English?
That's a really important one. The material explains that constantly translating in your head can actually slow down your progress.
It's like an extra step that your brain has to take.
Exactly. So the key is to start training your brain to think directly in English.
How did you do that?
Well, one simple but effective way is to start naming objects around you in English. You know, this is a table, that's a chair, I see a window. Just get used to associating those everyday objects with their English names.
It's like giving your surroundings new labels.
Exactly. And another good technique is to practice answering simple questions in your head in English.
So, for example, you could ask yourself, what did I do today?
And then answer in your mind, I woke up at 7, I had breakfast, I went to work. Simple things like that.
It's all about getting those internal English dialogues going.
Exactly. Now, of course, all of these techniques are really helpful, but the material also emphasizes one key principle that's absolutely essential for success.
And that is,
consistency.
of course, it always comes back to consistency, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources make it clear that short, regular practice sessions are far more effective than sporadic, long study sessions.
It's like with any skill, you want to make it a habit, something you do a little bit every day.
Exactly. And they suggest aiming for just 15 minutes a day to start with. You know, maybe you listen to a short podcast one day, watch a 10-minute English video the next day, practice writing a few sentences the day after.
Those small, consistent efforts really add up over time.
They do, and it's much easier to stay motivated when you're setting realistic, achievable goals.
That's so true. I mean, if you try to do too much at once, you're more likely to burn out.
Exactly. Now, another important point that the material raises is the importance of making learning fun.
Ah, yes. Because let's face it, learning a new language can be challenging. So it's got to be enjoyable too, right?
Absolutely. The sources stress that finding ways to engage with the language that you genuinely enjoy is key for staying motivated.
So what are some fun ways to learn?
Well, one suggestion is learning with music. You know, listening to English songs and trying to sing along can be a great way to improve your pronunciation and pick up new vocabulary.
And you're doing something you enjoy.
Exactly. And there are lots of language learning apps and games that can make learning more interactive and fun.
Oh yeah, I've heard of Duolingo. Is that a good one?
Yeah, it's a popular one. And even classic word games like Scrabble can be really helpful for expanding your vocabulary.
I love Scrabble.
Yeah.
And the material also talks about connecting with other people who share your interests, right?
Yeah, joining online communities or groups related to your hobbies can be a great way to practice English in a natural and enjoyable way.
So if you're into gaming or cooking or whatever, you can find people to chat with in English about those topics.
Exactly. It makes the learning feel less like studying and more like just hanging out and having fun.
Now, before we wrap up, I do want to touch on one more thing that can be a big hurdle for beginners.
What's that?
The fear of making mistakes.
Yes. That's a common one. And the material addresses it head on. They really emphasize that making mistakes is a completely normal and essential part of the learning process.
It's how we learn, right? We try things, we make mistakes, we adjust, and we try again.
Exactly. One of the sources even compares it to a child learning to walk. They're going to fall down a bunch of times before they get the hang of it.
And it's the same with language learning. You're going to stumble. You're going to say things wrong. But that's okay.
It's more than okay. It's necessary. The sources encourage you to reframe how you view mistakes.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing them as failures, see them as feedback, as opportunities to learn and improve.
I love that perspective. So for our listener who's starting out on their English learning journey, let's recap those key takeaways.
Absolutely. So first, focus on those basic everyday words and phrases that you can use right away.
Then make daily English listening a part of your routine, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Start speaking as soon as you can. Don't wait until you feel perfectly ready. Just dive in and start practicing.
Train your brain to think directly in English by naming objects, practicing internal dialogues, those kinds of things.
Stay consistent with your efforts. Short, regular practice sessions are key.
And most importantly, make it fun. Find ways to engage with the language that you genuinely enjoy.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Embrace them as part of the learning process.
Learning English is a journey. It takes time and effort, but it's so rewarding. So be patient with yourself, enjoy the process, and celebrate those small victories along the way.
Exactly. And remember, perfection isn't the goal. Continuous improvement is.
So for our listener today, as you go about your day, I want you to think about one small, actionable step you can take based on what we've discussed.
Maybe you could try listening to an English song, or naming a few objects around you in English.
Or maybe you could even practice a simple greeting. Or try talking to yourself in English for a few minutes.
Whatever it is, just make it something small and manageable, something you can commit to doing today.
Because those small, consistent efforts can lead to big results over time, not just in language learning, but in anything you set your mind to.
Exactly. So keep learning, keep practicing, and most importantly, keep having fun.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into learning English.
It was a pleasure.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.